Hi, I'm MM+M's Mark Yiskowitz, editor-at-large, and I'm thrilled to be part of this vodcast entitled Crossing the Divide, How Non-Traditional Approaches Can Transform Clinical Trial Recruitment. And this is brought to you by GCI Health, which has made significant investments in both its clinical trial recruitment expertise as well as cultural marketing competency over the last couple of years. And those are two topics we're going to be delving into more deeply over the next 30 minutes or so. 1 out of every 5 clinical trials actually is completed within its time frame, within its planned time frame. And of those that are delayed, about 55% of the time, is due to recruitment delays. And at the same time, while social media and digital media have kind of transformed healthcare marketing over the last few years, neither one of those modalities is being utilized to its fullest extent in clinical trial recruitment. So that's something that we're going to be talking about as well. And I'm joined by 2 experts in this area, Keontae Key, who's Group SVP of Digital at GCI Health, and her colleague, Matthew Grafeo, who is Executive Vice President, Global Head of Digital. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So Matthew, just starting out with you here, could you just tell us what's the current model of recruitment and why is it coming up short?
Yeah. Well, look, the current model is not working. I mean, like you said, the numbers are staggering. 80% of trials have issues because of recruitment challenges. And of trials that fail, 55% of them fail because of recruitment issues. So obviously, things aren't really working. And it's because of the model. And the model really has been reliant on trial sites themselves to do the recruitment. So it's an exciting time. We see the industry starting to look for new avenues to bring in, recruits.
Sure. So speaking of that, what's needed to make this effort more successful?
Well, that's a great question. So, to answer that, I'm going to give you a little bit about my journey into clinical trials. So, look, I've spent most of my career in healthcare marketing, but for that sliver of time that I wasn't in healthcare marketing, I actually worked for one of the major coffee companies. It has a little pod. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, I love this story.
And my job was to recruit people into this coffee company's club. And what we would do is we would look at segmentation models. Like, why wouldn't somebody join? Why would they join? Where are these people? What's the best way to reach them? And from that, we would craft messaging that was bespoke to each one of these personas. And we use channels to reach them, digital channels like social media, influencers. And when I got into clinical trials about 10 years ago, I assumed that's what was happening. And I found out very quickly that wasn't happening. So really what we're doing, what Keontae and I do, is really look at, marketing techniques. And we look at research and then we find out, why is there a barrier? Why wouldn't somebody join this trial? And then we craft bespoke strategies towards reaching that person, and we use digital media to do that. So it's not crazy, but it is something that's new for this field.
A renaissance of sorts when we think about clinical trials.
Right. It's a good time for it. And we alluded to this earlier in terms of how this has a real world impact, the delays. But why is so much effort, being put on speed of recruitment?
Yeah, well, the faster you could do recruitment, the faster you could do the entire trial, the quicker that medicine or that treatment will reach patients, right? And that's extremely important. And it's important to companies as well. The sooner that medicine is out, the sooner they can market that medicine. So really, when you think about recruitment, it's like one of the most important things in the whole life cycle of a treatment.
Mm-hmm, sure. Let's just switch gears here for a second. Keontae, can you explain how does a person's kind of identity play a role in whether they decide to participate in a clinical trial or not?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question and always super important. And I can say as a straight Black woman living in the South, bringing my lived experience into healthcare marketing for a long time, marginalized communities have not been really represented or even spoken to when it comes to communications. So when we just start there and then we kind of go into clinical trials, to talk about drug development, we have relied on healthy white men to sort of get approval for drugs and for medication. And so I think that is sort of what's changing, especially with FDA sort of saying for those phase 3 clinical trials, you must have a diversity plan. And that doesn't just mean diversity in terms of, Black people make up 13% of the population, but really looking at the disease insights, who is being impacted by this disease the most. And you need to making sure you are including those folks into the trial. So obviously identity from that perspective, because it, to your point, will make our medicines even better.
Right.
The second point, though, I think in terms of identity is biology. And we can look at this from even just a gender perspective. Look at the work the Society of Women's Research is doing, saying that gender is important. How women react to certain medication will be different than how men react to certain medications. Even when you think about trans people, trans women, trans men, thinking about how the spectrum of gender has changed, and obviously how our biology, is different. We want to make sure that I think our drugs and the medicines and the therapies that we put out into the world work for everyone. And it's great. We're having this sort of clinical trial renaissance where we're recognizing that we need to talk to people differently as communicators, but we also need to make sure whatever we're developing will work for everyone. So identity for us is the cornerstone for, how we'll talk to people, what channels we'll use. Like if you want to talk to my mom, go to Facebook. If you want to talk to me, come to Instagram. So thinking about also the complexities of our identities, right? We're just not these, one-dimensional people. We're multi-dimensional. So even in our communications to get people to trial, thinking about the intersectionality, thank you, Kimberly Crenshaw, of bringing that into the mix for the work that we do, because I think it's not just about recruitment, it's about advocacy. We want everyone to want to be in a clinical trial and trust that if I participate in this clinical trial, it'll help others, it'll be safe. So I think recruitment is one piece, but also retention is sort of that 100%. Second piece. We want people to stay in the trial because it's not just a failure of recruiting, it's keeping people in trial. So what are those barriers that maybe we aren't addressing, like transportation, like bias? Are we involving people's networks of care to make sure they complete the trial? What are the gaps that we just don't know about? So I think that is important in terms of just, getting people to complete the trial. Then once they complete the trial, we want them to be advocates. We want them to share with their neighbors and their friends and talk about, this trial wasn't terrible. Like I thought it was going to be this one thing, but it ended up being great. During the COVID-19 vaccine trials, I was on Clubhouse. I don't know if anyone's still on Clubhouse, but hello, Clubhousers. But they had this room where folks were talking about their COVID-19 vaccine trial participation, Black people talking about it. And one woman said, this has been great. I haven't had any issues. They talk to me all the time. I feel very safe. And so that not only convinced people to like, okay, I'll take the vaccine. That was more so the crux. But her just sharing that story made people feel comfortable. And I think that's sort of what we are aiming to do, is get people comfortable with the idea of participating in a clinical trial, and also making sure that they see the connection between what you see in your local pharmacy is only there because of clinical trials. So making that connection.
Keontae has a great way of kind of, and I'm gonna steal this from you, of kind of explaining the model for recruitment, but beyond recruitment. Like normally, or like traditionally, people see it as like a funnel. Like, how do we get people in this wide funnel, and then they're in the trial, and then goodbye, we're done. She explains it, and I love it, as a loop, or kind of like, a cycle. Especially when we're talking about marginalized groups, right? Like that we get people in, but afterwards we need to make sure that they're advocates going forward and that we're continuously engaging them and building trust. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, historically, like the African-American community has many historical reasons not to be part of a trial.
And contemporary.
Yeah, and contemporary, 100%. And there are lots of different groups, right? Like that we need to take into consideration. And the best people to do that, to help people come back to a trial, are the people themselves. Right? Because that's who you're going to trust. So that's something that I love to look at when in that model, when Keontae talks about it, is it's not just one and done. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Sure.
And even when we think about like, because I know the term hard to reach audiences is often thrown around. And I was talking to my mother a few weeks ago as we were kind of prepping for this. And I asked her, have you ever been asked to be a part of a clinical trial? 60-something-year-old Black woman on this planet, never been asked, right? And I, up until like COVID-19 vaccine trials, had never been asked. And my grandmother, who also transitioned due to diabetes, never been asked to be a part of a trial. So you have 3 generations of folks who have never been asked to be a part of a clinical trial. So that is obviously not an outlier. I think that's a pretty common story throughout the country.
Quote, hard to reach.
Yeah, right. We're not hard to reach. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know
Right,
about
right,
it. So I definitely think it's an opportunity to expand and broaden, our participants, because right now it's kind of flat.
There's a huge gap. You know, as you said, 13% of the population is African American in this country, and yet you see the rates of participation in new drugs coming on the market all the time. Right. You know, to put it mildly, that's, a huge glaring error.
Yes.
So, and it affects a lot of things, from, not just marketing, because you can only market on what's on the label, what's in the research.
But I think just
helping patients.
What's interesting and not to be lost in what Keontae was saying is that, what we do is we look at each disease state differently, and we look at what does, representation look for that particular disease, right? Because, like breast cancer is going to be different from testicular cancer or something like that. So it's going to have a different mix of people that we need to get into that. And diversity in for one trial could be, a different definition for another trial, right? And when we look at diversity, we're also looking at people's abilities, like you said before, transgender, people's different gender identities, economic factors as well. So I think there's a lot to be, really looked at in terms of diversity. And in order to do that in a really, educated way, we have to do the research. And research for a while, especially in marketing, was kind of a dirty word. Like people didn't want to pay for research. Now we see a renaissance for research, really. And we need to understand, like, who are these people? Where are they online? Where are they on social media? What are their habits? And how do they want to be talked to?
Yeah. So Keontae spoke about, the intersectionality, in people's lives in terms of their cultural backgrounds or lived experiences and how that translates into their communications preferences. And at the same time, you shared that members of your family have never participated and, never even seen or heard of, an invitation, let alone participated. So what does it mean to be culturally resonant in communications? What does that look like? How do you define that?
I think it means starting off with what Matthew says, and it's something we've built. It's identity experience, and it's sort of a 3-step sort of model where we start with cultural health intelligence with the research. We very much believe in, social listening. We think that's wonderful. It's great. But we also need to talk to people like we're doing right now. Analog, 100%. Kind of getting back into people's faces and really asking questions about, the nuances that the, quantitative,
the behavioral
social
insights.
Right? We need more of that, again, just to get to the meat of the matter. Once we have that, we have our belong messaging model. And so that's when we're able to kind of say, what does bias look like when this person maybe goes into a physician's office? One of the things we've been talking about, one of our team members, Brianna, Dr. Brianna, she's a PhD, said that sometimes physicians do not offer clinical trial participation to Black patients because they feel like they will not finish the trial. And I thought it was interesting. So it's like, well, how do we can't fix everything, but how do we try to mitigate that? Is that more so helping the physician, realize this is maybe some issues that come up for Black patients and we can help solve for? Is that bringing in the trial investigator to kind of help, solve for that? So that those things are important for us to note in our communications, because it doesn't matter how great our creative is if the physician isn't even offering this trial to them. Right. The other thing we look at is we call links. So not only looking at channels, but also links of care. I don't believe people... And I think over the last 3 years, we've seen you don't experience disease in a silo. You experience it in a community. So people having caregivers or networks of care that they can tap into, because those are also influencers, right? Those are your day-to-day influencers.
Help you make the decision to join a trial.
To join the trial and to finish the trial. So we need those folks who might help with in terms of transportation or filling something out. So we want to make sure we're bringing those people in because I think often they are left out. Then we think about outcomes. Obviously, finish the trial. If you have questions, you can download this form. Narration is important in terms of those influencers. And then we also think about gaps of care. Two, those might be questions that folks might have, like, if I participate in this trial, will it impact other medicines I'm taking? How much does it cost? How long? Those types of things that will come up. So once we have that belong messaging model together, that then informs sort of what the tactics look like. And that's when we kind of go into the search marketing channel strategy.
Really like a let's say an omni-channel digital approach. It's really very heavily digital, and that's what we do, right? We're looking at social media. We're looking at Facebook. We're looking at TikTok. We're looking at LinkedIn to reach HCPs for referral traffic. We are looking at search engine marketing and influencers, which is probably the most exciting development in clinical trials. Recruitment is something that is definitely going to be happening. And then we're looking at making sure that, our patients have a seamless user experience, that they can go to a website that has a pre-screener, that they could download things easily, that they could find things easily. And if it is, a disease state that is particular to a subgroup, that when they go to that website, that there are people that look like them on that website with really high value creative and videos and interactivity. I mean, that's what people are used to every day. And it gives those tools, give us like the modalities to express the messages that we have to for each one of the segments that we spoke about to get them over that hump into that trial and then hopefully to stay in that trial.
Right.
Sure.
It's a 360-degree approach for sure. And like we were saying, I know my church a few weeks ago had this company come in and talk about clinical trials. They weren't recruiting. It was just a matter of awareness, that making sure that you knew that you can participate in a clinical trial. And I think from an awareness perspective and those hard to reach audiences, it's just a matter of letting people know that the opportunity is there for them to participate in building advocacy, not when people get sick, but, when they're healthy and they want the information, available.
Matthew, just to key on one of the things you said as well with the rise of search engine marketing playing a role, can you kind of elaborate kind of how far we've come with that?
Search is one of probably the most effective channels. And the reason why is because I like to look at it, in almost like a B2B standpoint. That's a qualified lead. When somebody goes onto Google and searches like an ALK non-small cell lung cancer trial, they're looking for that trial as opposed to seeing our messaging and then considering it. They're actively seeking it. So search engine marketing is definitely one of, the most effective I like to call them smart techniques that we use.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also like the idea of layering it onto like radio ads and
100%.
targeting it based off of where the trial site is. So again, that 360 approach where we're not just doing one thing or like pulling one lever, but we're doing kind of all the things at all points to make sure,
Well, and you touch on targeting. I mean, that's something also with search and with all of social that we do is like trials have sites. There are physical locations. So with social media and with search and radio as well, we can target like in and around the Minneapolis-St. Paul area within 60 miles. So we can really be very effective. And with HCPs, we could even target on certain channels by their MPI information. We can target by their titles. So I can target thoracic surgeons within 30 miles of, Minneapolis-St. Paul. So you can see digital media really gives you tools that are extremely, I would say really, really powerful in reaching the audiences we were trying to reach.
Sure. The other thing I was thinking of when you both were talking about, trust is kind of a huge issue, and it's not something that's going to be addressed, tomorrow. But to the extent that these technical issues, transportation, social determinants of health, what's it going to cost me? Is it being even offered the opportunity? And then, am I seeing it in these different channels? To the extent that these technical issues, as I call them, can be addressed, you're putting your best foot forward in terms of recruiting and retaining volunteers. So it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like that when we talk about trust because it opens us up to talk about influencers.
Yes.
And Keontae and I love talking about influencers
Yeah.
because that's something that hasn't really been done in the industry, using social media influencers. And, trust is huge, especially when you're asking somebody to commit to trying out a new, medicine and then to go through the whole trial process. And social media influencers and influencer marketing is more and more prolific. So we definitely see influencer marketing as, the next big thing in clinical trials recruitment because it has that authenticity. It builds trust. I mean, people trust other people more than they trust companies. And that's what an influencer really is.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Is Jay-Z going to be recruiting for the next
Jay-Z,
clinical trial?
Beyonce, let's get them all in to recruit all the people into trials so we can make the best medicine.
I like to see
I
that.
do think when it comes to where is this industry going? I think that we will start seeing, and you've seen a little bit to date, but you'll start seeing big marketing campaigns around clinical trials. And that could be having celebrity spokespeople. It could be having hashtags. It could be having events. I think really the sky's the limit when it comes to, and I using the word marketing, it might be a little crass, but it is marketing for clinical trials.
We need it. I think, and I know to steal your consumer sort of angle, I am a big Nike fan. I'm not wearing Nikes right now. Oh, can I say Nike?
I think that's fine.
Okay. So big fan. Obviously when they have different releases of shoes or they're releasing Jordans, another, pair of Jordans, I'm like, I gotta go to the sneakers app. And I'm maybe one day, clinical trials can be like that. I go to clinicaltrials.gov
awesome.
and
see what trials are dropped.
What's happening. And even if they're not for me, I can share it with someone in my community who might benefit. So.
Yeah, and any other things in terms of what's on the horizon for clinical trial recruitment, retention, community health?
The big thing is really looking at it as marketing campaigns. So, I mean, I think, on the horizon is large scale marketing campaigns, but I also think targeting. So, a lot of the times we go directly to patients. I think HCPs and going to doctors for referral traffic is something that is extremely powerful. Now, the problem with that a lot of the times is that it's hard to track. Right. So if I reach out to a doctor about a clinical trial, they might go and word of mouth refer 10 patients. But how do I track that those are the patients that went to this website? Now, we've come up with a couple of ways to do that. And I think that was kind of a reason why that you see recruitment hasn't really pivoted towards referral traffic. But I do think that's another big thing on the horizon because people do trust their doctors. And, it's something that I think an avenue that is extremely, extremely important.
Sure. Great.
And I think layered onto that, you kind of mentioned it, is community. I think it's always been there, but community and trust are big things for me that, if I don't trust you, I'm not going to do a thing. And even when we think about historical sort of wrongs when it comes to health, and we talk a lot about medical bias, the doctor is doing this thing to me. When you think about Tuskegee, it wasn't just the doctor or the nurse. It was a whole sort of structure that was essentially lying to folks. So we have to also think about when people walk into a trial site, how is this admin, behaving toward this person? How is the advocate sort of moving them along, behaving toward this person? That's kind of sometimes beyond us, but I do think there's opportunity for us to at least influence, say, hey, we have found that people are dropping out because they do not feel comfortable when they come in.
Sure.
Is there a way to set up some sort of training? I know there's a lot of bias training happening now, but at the end of the day, we're all here to provide the best experience for folks. These are some things might be helpful.
Well, it's a tonality as well of our communications. One of the things that people like to be spoken to in the language that is native to them. So we're doing trials right now where we're putting out on social media in Creole for people that's their primary language, and it's respectful.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of really the crux. It's a respectful way of being communicated to, and it builds that trust.
Right. Exactly.
Sure.
People feeling seen.
Yeah.
And then, again, that community piece of not just talking to the patient, but talking to everyone who might have influence in their lives, whether it's a parent, a partner, the pastor. We want to talk to all the people about this. So,
Well, it's an exciting time in marketing. I mean, like you said, and especially in clinical trials, not everybody is a white male, and it gives us, as a marketer, it gives us all these different opportunities and all these different techniques that we could flex to reach people that need to be reached. And I don't think they're hard to reach, to be quite honest. I just think they weren't being reached.
I don't think it's hard either. Maybe we can get Spike Lee to drop some.
That would be awesome.
Clinical trial ads.
He needs to take a look at this for sure. Yeah. Well, it's definitely a broader conversation, and thank you for helping us to ensure that our medicines benefit everybody, and it's really a key, crucial conversation. So this has been fascinating. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.